Hello, second graders. It's time for another chapter of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. This is chapter 5, and this is about Todd. We're actually going to read two chapters this time. This is Todd. Chapter 5, Todd. All of the children in Mrs. Jules' class, except Todd, were talking and carrying on. Todd was thinking. Todd always thought before he spoke. He got an idea. His eyes lit up. Todd finished thinking and began to speak. But before he said two words, Mrs. Jules called him. Todd, she said, you know better than to talk in class. You must learn to work quietly, like the other children. She wrote his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Todd looked in amazement. All the other children, who had been talking and screaming and fighting only seconds earlier, were quietly working in their workbooks. Todd scratched his head. A child was given 3 chances by Mrs. Jules. The first time he did something wrong, Mrs. Jules wrote his name on the blackboard under discipline. The second time he did something wrong, she would put a check next to his name, and the third time he did something wrong, she circled his name. Todd reached into his desk and pulled out his workbook. He only had just started on it when he felt something tap on his shoulder. It was Joy. What page are you on? Joy asked. Page 4, Todd whispered. I'm on page 11, said Joy. Todd didn't say anything. He didn't want to get into trouble. He just went back to work. 5 minutes later, Joy tapped on him again. Todd ignored her, so Joy poked him in the back with her pencil. Todd pretended he didn't notice. Joy got up from her seat and sharpened her pencil. She came back and poked it in Todd's back. What page are you on? She asked. Page 5, Todd answered. Boy, you aren't very smart, said Joy. I'm on page 29. It isn't a race, Todd whispered. 5 minutes later, Joy pulled Todd's hair and didn't let it go until he turned around. What page are you on? She demanded. Page 6, Todd answered as quietly as he could. I'm on page 200, Joy shouted. Todd was very angry. Will you please let me do my work and stop bothering me? Mrs. Jules heard him. Todd, what did you say about talking? What did I say about talking in class? Todd scratched his head. Mrs. Jules put a check next to Todd's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Todd really tried to be good. He knew that if he talked one more time, Mrs. Jules would circle his name. Then he'd have to go home early at 12 o'clock on the kindergarten bus, just as he had the day before and the day before that. In fact, there hadn't been a day since Mrs. Jules took over the class that she didn't send Todd home early. She said he did it for his own good. The other children went home at 2 o'clock. Todd wasn't really bad. He just always got caught. He really wanted to stay past 12 o'clock, but he wanted to find out what the class did from 12 to 2. But it didn't look as though he was going to be this day. It was only 10:30, and he already had 2 strikes against him. He sealed his lips and went back to work. There was a knock on the door. Mrs. Jules opened it. 2 men wearing black masks and holding something said, Give me your money, they demanded. All I have is a nickel, said Mrs. Jules. I have a dime, said Mauricia. I have 13 cents, said Leslie. I have 4 cents, said Damien. What kind of bank is this? Asked the 2 robbers. It's not a bank, it's a school, said Todd. Can't you read? No, said the robbers. Neither can I, said Todd. Do you mean we walked all the way up 30 flights of stairs for nothing? Asked the robber. Don't you have anything valuable? Todd's eyes lit up. We sure do, he said. We have knowledge. He grabbed Joy's workbook and gave it to the robbers. Knowledge is more valuable than money. Thanks, kid, said one of the robbers. Maybe I'll give up being a criminal and become a scientist, said the other. They left the room without hurting anybody. Now, I don't have a workbook, complained Joy. Mrs. Jules gave her a new one. Joy had to start all over back at the beginning. Hey, Joy, what page are you on? Asked Todd. Page 1, sighed Joy. I'm on page 8, laughed Todd triumphantly. Mrs. Jules heard him, circled his name. Todd had 3 strikes against him. At 12 o'clock, he left the room to go home early on the kindergarten bus. But this time, when he left, he was like a star baseball player leaving the field. All the children stood up and clapped their hands and whistled. Todd scratched his head. Okay, the next chapter is called BB. This is BB. BB was a girl with short brown hair. A little BB noise. A little BB nose, totally tiny toes, and big brown eyes. Her full name was BB Gunn. She was the fastest to draw in Mrs. Jules's class. She could draw a cat in less than 45 seconds, a dog in less than 30, and a flower in less than 8 seconds. But, of course, BB never drew just one dog, or one cat, or one flower. Art was from 12:30 to 1:30. Why, in that time, she could draw 50 cats, 100 flowers, 20 dogs, and several eggs or watermelons. It took her the same amount of time to draw a watermelon than an egg. Kelvin sat next to BB. He didn't think he was very good at art. Why, it took him the whole period just to draw one airplane. Instead, he just helped BB. He was BB's assistant. As soon as BB would finish one masterpiece, Kelvin would take it from her and set on a clean piece of paper. Whenever her crayon ran low, Kelvin was ready with a new one. That way, BB didn't have to waste any time, and in return, BB would draw 5 or 6 airplanes for Kelvin. At 12:30 for art time, it was 12:30 time for art. BB was ready. On her desk was a sheet of yellow construction paper. In her hand was a green crayon. Kelvin was ready. He had a stack of papers and a box of crayons. Ready, BB? Said Kelvin. Ready, Kelvin, said BB. Okay, said Mrs. Jules. Time for art. She had hardly finished her sentence when BB had already drawn half a picture of a leaf. Kelvin took it from her, put another piece of paper down. Red, called BB. Kelvin handed BB a red crayon. Blue, called BB. He gave her a blue crayon. They were quite a pair. Their teamwork was remarkable. BB drew pictures as fast as Kelvin could pick up one piece of paper and set a new one down. A fish, an apple, 3 cherries, bing, bing, bing. At 1:30, Mrs. Jules announced, Okay, class, art is over. BB dropped her crayon and fell over on her desk. Kelvin sighed and leaned back in his chair. He could hardly move. They had broke their old record. BB had drawn 378 pictures. They lay a pile on Kelvin's desk. Mrs. Jules walked by. Kelvin, did you draw all these pictures? Kelvin laughed. No, I can't draw. BB drew them all. Well then, what did you draw? Mrs. Jules asked. I didn't draw anything, said Kelvin. Why not? Don't you like art? Asked Mrs. Jules. I love art, said Kelvin. That's why I didn't draw. Mrs. Jules didn't understand. It would have taken me a whole period just to draw one picture, said Kelvin, and BB would only be able to draw 100 pictures. But with the two of us working together, she was able to draw 378 pictures. That's a lot more art. BB and Kelvin shook hands. No, said Mrs. Jules. That isn't how you measure art. It isn't how many pictures you have, how good the pictures are. Why, a person could spend his whole life just drawing one picture of a cat. In that time, I'm sure BB could draw millions of cats. 2 million, said BB. Mrs. Jules continued. But if that one picture is better than each of BB's 2 million, then the person has produced more art than BB. BB looked as if she was going to cry. She picked up all the pictures from Kelvin's desk and threw them in the garbage. Then she ran from the room. I thought her pictures were very good, said Kelvin. He reached in the garbage pail and looked at a crumpled up picture of an airplane. BB walked outside to the playground. Louis, the yard teacher, spotted her. Where are you going? He asked. I'm going to draw a picture of a cat, said BB. Will you bring it to school and show me tomorrow? Asked Louis. Tomorrow? Laughed BB. By tomorrow, I doubt if I'll even be finished with one whisker. And that is the end of BB's story. All right. Next time we will learn about Kelvin. See you then.